Welcome to the Human Origin Project, where we explore the science of you. To keep up to date, go to our iTunes channel and subscribe, and please leave a review if you enjoyed today's show. Today I'm very honored to be talking to Dr. Sue Morter, the author of The Energy Codes, the 7-step system to awaken your spirit, heal your body, and live your best life. Dr. Sue is an expert in quantum biology and energy medicine with the elevation of human consciousness and life mastery. Dr. Morter speaks worldwide on the topics of user-friendly quantum science, bioenergetics, natural healing, and human potential. She's long advocated the science of activating higher frequency energy patterns in the human body. As a health practitioner, I see people suffer with mindset problems every day, and you can tell when someone's energy is low, but the problem is we don't have the tools to interpret this in mainstream settings. Dr. Morter takes us through the step-by-step meditation and bodily functions to help our mind take control of our lives. I had great fun talking to Dr. Sue. She's the embodiment of energy. I highly recommend you grab a copy of The Energy Codes, which is out on March 19 at all good book retailers. I really hope you enjoy this exploration of quantum biology, consciousness, and how to elevate your own energy levels. It crosses such a broad field of scientific and really applicable knowledge today that really there's a lot of different people bringing this together, and I'm really excited to share your story as to how you've extracted such a skill set. Now, one thing we do before we start is that we always ask a question about what's one of your earliest memories that has shaped your life?
As a child, as a kid, I remember being able to see energy fields around people. And it's amazing to me that we live in a time where I get to talk about this, because for many, many years I didn't. And I would ask my mom, what's that yellow thing following Dad around on stage as he was teaching these other doctors his energy medicine principles. And this was back in the 70s. And I could see that it would make her a little bit nervous, because she would look and she couldn't see what that was. And I would ask kids at school, what's that red thing, hanging out on the playground around us? And so I make the joke that I played alone at recess a lot, because, it's like, who talks about stuff like that? So I shut it down because it created friction in my life. And in my 20s and 30s, I wanted to get it back and couldn't. And then ultimately led my life in the friction of really suppressing the truth of who I am. And in that, great pain got generated. And in the midst of that pain, I sought out meditation. And instantly, as soon as I started meditating, all kinds of multidimensional experiences started happening. And one of which, as I came back out of meditation, was my ability to see the energy fields again. So as I stilled my mind, I could again have access to the deep, true, essential self. And this is what we have to do. So it led me into recreating the circuits, exploring. I turned my life into a living laboratory to figure out how to access these multidimensional states, because I knew that it was setting me free to find access to them. I wanted to be able to do it on command. So that led me into the years of process research, clinical and experiential, that I've had.
It's a fascinating story, and you really kind of have to wonder, what a child would think, when you kind of see that. And your dad was talking about energy healing, so it's not like it was in an unfamiliar space, but it was still unacceptable.
Yeah.
And it's amazing kind of the trip you have to go to you really reclaim that. Tell us about your training and your background, what you did in your college years, between that, the awakening, as you call it.
Sure. So I was raised in an environment of energy medicine. Quantum science was our dinner table conversation. Basically, that thoughts create things, and that what we intend ultimately out pictures. And so this was my upbringing. I've never been to the doctor and gotten an antibiotic for a health condition that I've had. I've always been directed toward natural healing and trained just by upbringing. It was my reality that we have the ability to heal ourselves, that we are supposed to be self-healing, self-referencing, self-regulating, awakening and ultimately self-illuminating individuals. And so I went to school to become a chiropractor, to be able to work with energy medicine the way that my father was teaching it around the world. And I traveled and helped teach other doctors how to do the work, and all this through the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. And ultimately, I started to feel a sense of friction and frustration in my life because I had shut down these innate internal abilities and had kind of moved into an intellectualization of the concepts, not really allowing my own version of it to be valid, to be true, to be revealed on an ongoing basis and trust it to take me where I needed to go. I shut it down and started using my head, moved up into my head like we do, to figure out how to do it in a right way or an acceptable way, one that belonged or fit in, etc. So I, of course, met up with the frustrations that occur from living in our heads, like everyone experiences ultimately. And I was drawn to meditation. And within meditation, I had an instant awakening experience that was to change my life forever. Now, meanwhile, I've been in a clinical setting doing, reproducible, experiential modalities that were all based in outcomes for healing. I had a scoliosis, I had migraine headaches, I had all kinds of things going on because I wasn't able to apply for myself individually what I was able to help other people do, because I was doing hands-on modalities with them, moving energies in the body, removing subconscious interferences, establishing a better relationship between the conscious and the subconscious in them. And when that relationship got established, their bodies would start to heal. So it was a great success, and I was doing that and everything was working, except that internally, because I was suppressing some part of my own true self, in the midst of all that, an implosion was happening in my own body. Pain started happening. I was unable to go to work multiple times, 1 or 2 days a week for a series of months. And that's what led me into meditation. It's like, this empirical data is fantastic, and these outcomes for patients is certainly working, but something's missing in my own personal experience. And what we now know, and that science is even validating, of course, is that experience is what's real, and that we have to develop science that can explain our experiences rather than invalidating our experience because there's no science to prove what's happening or to validate its possibility. So we're turning inside out, right?
That's a really good point, and kind of your journey really, it really explores how science is catching up to some of the phenomena, that you experienced earlier in your life. I mean, how would you explain, so you were, talking about quantum science earlier in your life. How would you explain how that has come, because that's become leaps and bounds in the last decades. And that's what we're really seeing. We're seeing an expansion of the scientific field to understand the phenomena that is real in terms of these strange, what we would call, potentially any kind of phenomena, like whether it's, paranormal or anything like that.
Yes.
And so how would you say that the quantum science has progressed in those early conversations into what was today that is very, very real, and that consciousness is a part of our reality and the fundamental act
Sure.
of it?
So quantum science has been around for over 100 years. It's closer to 200 years where these experiences, actually even back to the turn of the century, that last century that we just came out of, in terms of understanding that as the electron microscope was invented and we became aware of the world tinier than atoms, we began to recognize that thoughts and perceptions are having an influence over what we see. And so we're creating our reality 100%. And we're now recognizing this. So really what's come so far is humanity's interpretation or understanding or awareness of what quantum science has been showing us for a long, long time, for generations. And so what's happening is a critical mass is occurring. And this is fantastic because once we hit critical mass in this kind of a fashion, there's no stopping it. We are reawakening to the fact that we are creating this entire experience. And as we do so, we will become able to manage our experiences in a proactive way. We'll be able to head it off at the pass, if you will, or to generate a heaven on earth kind of experience, or to heal ourselves, or to change the necessity for war, for profit, in order to feel that something, is actually happening on this planet. And so as we do that, it's because we're embracing what quantum science has been showing us. And so the expansion of quantum science into our culture is what is ultimately going to change our cultural exchanges.
And what's your, someone that has been in it for so long, what's your interpretation of quantum science and for instance, the ideas of the Copenhagen interpretation, the double slit experiment, where and how a matter is a wave and it can exist in potentially 2 points at any one time. Where does consciousness and, anyone listening to this podcast, where they're that thing that sits behind their eyes, behind their, when you strip it all away, that's that presence that is there, where does that sit in terms of all of this talk of physics and particles, and for you, how do you explain that? Because I think you've got a very concise understanding of that.
Well, sure. We are awareness itself. And so where we are seated will ultimately determine the experience that we're having. If we are attached to the mind, if we're seated on the mind field, we are based in duality. And so we are based in fear, because in any dualistic experience, if we're enjoying ourselves in this moment, there's a background fear that in the next moment we're not going to be enjoying ourselves. And so we then begin to protect and try to control our environment so that we can continue enjoying our experience. It will never work that way. What we have to do is unattach from the mind and really seat ourselves as that presence behind everything being stripped away. What's left? It's the true essence of who we are. And that in the quantum world is this standing, it is the still point, it is the absolute presence itself. And so when we identify as that, we start to dissolve the need for the dualistic experience, and everything begins to change. We don't have to validate. We don't look outwardly for our feedback. We have a sense of self that is established in wholeness. And this idea of being in 2 places at once, and these types of circumstances that are so phenomenal and fantastical to our linear trained minds is an absolute true reality. It is quite possible for us to be experiencing multidimensionally, simultaneously, what we call parallel universe, or what we call an otherworldly experience is actually happening simultaneously, and we span all the dimensions in that way. So the quantum flip is something that I write about in the book, and that is that it is showing that a 0-point field isn't required for something to change its momentum into a different direction, that we can be moving in any direction instantaneously without having to slow down and turn around. So the fact that we've been based in this linear world thinking that it's going to be a process, I have to slow down my old habits and turn them around to build new habits, is actually an ancient idea. It's really not where we are today. That in an instant we can generate a different vibrational frequency and therefore a different reality upon command. We just have to learn how to build the circuitry to be able to recognize that is possible for us in a consistent and unwavering fashion. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm teaching people how to build the neurocircuitry by first working with the quantum field. First, the electromagnetic energy has to build circuitry through a chaotic mess, which we've been living in.
Yeah, I think what you're really talking about there is that there are levels of understanding with this, and once we go to understand the baseline levels, we can then progress higher in a much more progressive fashion, because we're not misinterpreting. Because if we think that matter, that the world is just matter, and that this is everything that's here, then everything that I kind of put it as 20th century science. We kind of worked out all the matter stuff, and then we kind of bring it all together, right? And so once you place things on its correct platform, and so once we realize that these tiny particles that everything is made of really isn't matter, and that our consciousness is connecting and moving into this, it really does start to make sense as to then how can we manipulate this. How do you think in terms of, one thing I think that people today need is they need to understand, how it applies to them. And so quantum biology is kind of like a newish term, but it's been around for a while as well. But we know now, so these principles apply to the body. And so, we know, for instance, quantum tunneling and certain enzymatic reactions, they rely on the spin of particles. how does that that makes it very real for people, right? That this stuff is happening in your body and that you can affect it. And so what are some of the findings in that kind of field that you feel that it's really kind of breakthrough?
Sure. So everything is energy, right? Everything is just energy vibrating at different frequencies. And as we begin to master our perceptive field in that tone, when we look from that perspective that this is all just energy, and the vibrational frequency that I sustain in my own personal environment is going to determine the common ground of energetics, the vibrational frequency that's like the universal bandwidth, like the emergency broadcast system on a radio system that addresses all radio stations. So no matter which one you're listening to, you would get this message. So there is this master field, this master frequency that we have to learn to train our minds to find and to sit on and to not let anything pull us off of that frequency. So we have to build the circuitry in our own system to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're wobbling and there's a distortion in the field, and we look out through this field and we see a distorted reality. We see one that looks like it's unfair or unkind or unloving, or that the necessities of protectivism and survivorship are appropriate. And that's a distortion in our thinking. It's a distortion in our perceptive field. So I'm teaching people how to build the circuitry to stabilize this rising awareness that we are as we're incrementally awakening more and more and more, to stabilize in that way so that we take the wobble out of our own energetic system, and that shifts the field from being distorted to being more perfected. And then we can see that there's actually no challenge here at all. Now, the reflection of that inside our own physicality, which is a reflection of our consciousness and our ability to master this master frequency, is that we heal. We start to heal physically. I healed a scoliosis in my body. I healed migraine headaches as well, because I started learning how to flow this energetic through the system with my mind, consciously and intentionally, by using my body as a feedback mechanism to teach my mind where circuits needed to be built more efficiently, more effectively, etc. And by doing so, have the ability to self-heal. So the vibrational frequency that comes all the way into the cellular level, that changes us on a chemical level through the relationship between the endocrine system and the mind field, what happens is we start receiving messages at the cellular level that are more perfected through the study of epigenetics, which is that, our genes are not the be-all end-all, but rather they're turned on or turned off by our environment through little antennas on the surface of the cell that pick up a message and then report into the internal cell about the state of the union, if you will, and whether we should be creating chemicals of survivorship or chemicals of creativity and a sense of well-being. And so as the vibrational frequency that hits these antennas becomes more coherent and becomes more holistic, this system on a subconscious level perceives wholeness and well-being. And so it starts sending a message up to the brain that says, all is well here. You can chill and become the creative genius that you were meant to be. And healing happens as a byproduct of that. So on every level, we heal because we're not focused on trying to find a problem, fix it, and heal it, but rather we're embracing our wholeness as the creative energy that we truly are. And as we embrace that and become that, healing happens as a byproduct of the recognition or the recognition of what we are as energy beings.
And really what you're saying is it's a deeper understanding of that, we're made up of atoms. Atoms, we know, are made up of energy particles. And so we are energy. And so when you understand your bodily systems as energy systems that have, far deeper meaning and far deeper interplay and, progressions, epigenetics really came about in 2002 after the Human Genome Project. The Human Microbiome Project showed us in 2008 that we are nearly more bacteria than our own human cells. So like when we start to paint this picture, we've got this huge complex, organism, and even beyond an organism doesn't really even describe it. And you're describing, how let's understand this whole thing and let's, control it in a way that we can get the whole thing into control. It's really I think, when you bring that understanding, and when people kind of feel this and see themselves as part of this whole field, it's quite life-changing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It changes everything. We begin to be able to morph, as we've witnessed bacterial organisms be able to shape-shift themselves to survive in an environment, or to morph into the circumstances that are more appropriate for their very inhabiting the space. We start to recognize, just as an example in what you're speaking about, that we are made of that we have the ability to shape-shift ourselves. And it's only been our beliefs that have kept us from doing that. Our beliefs have held us in certain geometries, certain mathematics that have energy running through our system, which is what we are. We are energy that are managing or controlling or limiting how that energy is able to express in its fullness, because our mind field is so powerful, it can shut down or shut out an infinite amount of vibrational conditions, vibrational states, just because we don't even allow ourselves to perceive it or to accept it as a possibility for us. And so consequently, we are living as a distortion, as a mutation, versus what we could actually be being, which would be self-healing, self-regulating, and into a much higher degree of sophistication than what we currently are experiencing ourselves as being self-healing. I mean, we cut ourselves and we know that it's going to heal. We break a bone, if it's repositioned properly, the body knows what to do to heal that. But that is a very elementary version of what we could be doing with those same principles and faculties that we are made of.
Yeah, the way I kind of look at it, it really is that we're just deepening our understanding, and we're getting our whole self around, and how we ourselves interplay with what's going on around us. It's absolutely mind-blowing, the way when you think of the implications in health, in across what humanity can do potentially with consciousness. But it's really not a new topic, is it? And there's a lot of these teachings are very grounded in ancient philosophy, and when you look into the Vedas and Egypt and into the Mayan cultures, they really spoke about this kind of stuff. And tell us about your background and how you've experienced what you're seeing and what we know about the science and how it connects to ancient cultures.
Yes, it's a phenomenal time to be alive, because we are remembering. We are able to recognize what the indigenous peoples on the planet were aware of, what possibly was seeded here from civilizations that had greater understandings than that we are now reawakening to. As I had this big awakening in my own consciousness and really illuminated at this Atman, this higher self level, I could perceive, first of all, I could see in those moments, I could see 360 degrees in every direction in a light so brilliantly bright. It was 10 times brighter than the brightest day in the desert I had ever experienced. And I was a ray of light. I was me. I knew who I was. I had free will. I had consciousness, but I wasn't in a body. I was just this ray of light, this stream of consciousness, which science would say that's part of the brain that's imagining these things, etc. But it wasn't something that, it was far beyond anything that I had experienced before. And what happened after that is the circuitry in my system started kicking in and igniting and activating aspects of my own structure, my own DNA, my own chemistries started changing. I healed a scoliosis in my body. Migraine headaches were healed. All kinds of things were changing just because my vibrational frequency was changing. So then I'm putting together through clinical, I turned my life into this laboratory, started measuring and monitoring what was happening so that I could reproduce this state, this frequency, that I could access it. And I used my patients and clients, as I would find something that would work with me, I would try it with them. I found they were getting better faster. They were healing. They were staying healed longer, and things were changing. So I started codifying what was happening, and that's what I'm writing about. But the beautiful part was I found that in the process of doing all that, I came upon certain principles that were required for me to be able to return to this state of higher consciousness. And after doing so, and after starting to teach it to other people, and really having this body of work that I was working with, I came upon the study in the Upanishads Upanishads and the Yoga Sutras and the Vedas, these ancient texts that are really the first scriptures that were written about self-awareness, about consciousness, about evolving ourselves intentionally, about how to live from this state of higher being. And I saw that what was in them was actually the same as what I had discovered. And my first response was, great, where was this 10 years ago when I really needed to hear it? And on the second hand, I was thrilled that I hadn't seen it, because by discovering it myself, I recognized that every one of us is made of this, that we are really compressed. We are the universe. We are the cosmic energy. We are the manifest world compressed into physical reality, into the physical dimension. So the human body is a structuring dynamic of the universe. And as we rise up through it with our consciousness, we're tapping all the various vibrational frequencies of the universal being. And so universal intelligence is alive and well inside of us. These Vedas, these sutras, these sacred texts, the Upanishads, they are not something that was just available to us thousands of years ago. It's available and alive and well now inside of every single one of us. And it is so important that we embody that and animate it and allow it to become true within us so that we can return to this deep wisdom. So I go to sacred sites all over the world, and I see I have experiences there. I see things that are obviously validating what I have reawakened to inside of myself. I see the hieroglyphs in the temples going up the Nile, and I know what they're saying. I go to Machu Picchu, and I see something very unique about things that people have spoken about forever, about the structures and how these temples were built, and the magnificence and the mystery of it all, and these wonders of the world are actually revealing the truth of who we are and what we're made of. And then I years later, after commenting on it or teaching the students that are traveling with me, I hear that the Germans were just here studying that these stones actually aren't chiseled out of the mountainside and rolled up into this position, that they're actually measured as a fusion of materials, that they don't have the normal veining of regular stones, and they are an amalgamation, an alchemical response to something that happened 100,000 years ago. Interestingly, we're also shown that the human DNA is considered to be a fusion of many different species that were put together at about 100,000 years ago. And then we go to ancient Egypt, and we see that these embossings, they aren't carvings, they're embossings that were obviously done with laser-typed technology, that they are dating back to about 100,000 years ago. And so it seems to me that we are reawakening through the advent of our technology and the study of quantum science and the recognition that there is more than meets the eye, that we are multidimensional creatures, and that we have existed for a long, long time, and that we as conscious beings are rearranging that into different shapes and different circumstances, and reawakening to the great collection and collaboration of energetics that we are. And we're far beyond healers. We are masters, and it's about awakening our awareness to these facts, that there is much more than meets the eye.
It's funny when you go through that process, and for people especially that have this very kind of modern perspective on things, and we're stuck in our textbook and our very literal sense of interpreting the world. When you look at ancient sites through that lens, you really don't. There's it kind of looks like this archaic, very rudimental view of the world. Egypt is very beautiful, but you just don't appreciate. And then all of a sudden, once we've upgraded our knowledge, and it's just expanding our knowledge, isn't it? So, once you really understand about, there is deep messages in particle physics, and they've shown, for instance, in the Dogon tribe in Africa, that their teachings talk about the second star of Sirius, and it wasn't, and astronomers are still trying to work out whether there's a third one, because they talk about that as well. And they talk about the formation of matter, the 266 portions of matter that we now know are close to what Stephen Hawking says is the amount of fundamental particles. They were talking about this in their very sacred teachings, that their priests and everyone, and they would hold this. But now today what we're seeing is we're going back to this, and really it's just amazing, to see someone like you who has embodied this, and really, this is all, you can see that this has happened before, and that we are now experiencing this again. It's a very exciting time. In terms of Vedic philosophy, particularly, they talk about consciousness as being the baseline in terms of our reality is controlled by consciousness. And so how did that, when you looked at these texts, how did that affect your practice, or did it just confirm, for instance, were you just like, yep, that's it? And so when you studied these things, or when you experimented and understood them, and you saw these ancient texts, did you see there's like, oh yeah, this is the same thing? Or was it kind of like a calibration process that that kind of changed things to moving forward, or was it just like, yep, that confirms?
It was mostly a confirmation, amazingly to my own mind. It's like, how could this land in my consciousness without having read it before? I recognized that the how-tos that they were describing, the things that were the most important for a being to awaken to their origin, to awaken to who they truly are, there were certain things that they needed to do in order to do that. They had to have certain understandings or certain perspectives and certain practices, etc. And these were the understandings and practices that were developing through my own trial and error process. So it was, completely validating and refining at the same time, because it was something that I was just learning to articulate it. I was just, bringing it all the way forward into words and into these concepts. As I was living it and living into it, I could be it. I could heal myself through this presence that was animating, that was awakening inside of me. And as it turns out, it was the real me that was surfacing and rising up through the shield, the layer of the personality self and the thinking, rational, linear mind. It was the quantum mind, which we call the observer mind in psychology. And what was happening was the birthing of the true essential self was having a strong, robust enough presence that it was able to pierce through the barriers of this analytical, rational learning mind from reading and studying and doing research from the perspective that we've been trained to do. And so it was kind of happening simultaneously in this kind of from every direction all at once, landing in this place, and tremendous. I also wanted to speak to what you're saying about these ancient civilizations. The Cherokees, the Native American Indians, claim in their history that their lineage is directly from another planet, from the Pleiades, that they are direct descendants, and these types of influences here. The ancient Egyptians write about other civilizations bringing technology to the planet and helping to evolve our consciousness, that in ancient Egypt what was happening was the mind field was developing, and it was so powerful that it was blowing things up just because we would direct our powerful quantum attention in a laser-like fashion, and it was just this power that was beyond control. And that these other civilizations called from a fifth dimension, what we reference as a fifth dimensional being, which is just a higher frequency, higher level of consciousness is all it is. It's not about somewhere out there. It's all right here. But that they brought the vibrational frequency of love, which tethered this power of the mind and allowed us to kind of put an insulator on it, so that what was being created was something that was holistic and that wasn't blowing things apart. So many different ways of looking at it. What we know is that we are electromagnetic beings, that our consciousness is electric and our system, our body, is more magnetic, and that as we merge those energies together, we are able to awaken to a greater version of who we are.
It's amazing, isn't it? We do have, there are tracings of the practices, the Cherokee Indians, Egyptians, the Mayans, Indigenous Australians, all over the world, these practices that they held so sacred, and it's something in the modern world we've kind of seen them as a little bit rudimental, and probably, just just
Right.
this strange cultural thing that they would do. But when you start talking in this fashion, you look at what they do and the chanting and the use of smoking and
vibration.
sound vibration, it's energy. And so what they were doing with the sacred practices that they wrote about, that they knew, that they say they were taught, and every society on the planet says they were taught this information, whether it's, someone who knows where they got it from, like someone like yourself who was born with it, or this ability to be able to access it, or whether it was, some kind of, maybe an intelligent being that could potentially, teach humanity. It seems like we're in the realms of possibility there, that could happen. And it blows your mind today, but they really had practices. And one thing I love about your work is that you really bring it to an actionable, step-by-step, how anyone listening to this can begin their practice. And because this is important, isn't it? It's something that you've healed yourself and many people with. But really, when you start to think about this is a very big concept that we kind of all need to get our heads around. So tell us about the steps you go through in your book and how you found this as an easy way to kind of access, because I think not everyone has the fortunate, or maybe unfortunate, however you look at it, way of being born with this kind of thing.
Right.
And it's obviously a gift. And but how have you brought that so that other people can practice it?
Certainly. No, what I'm doing in the book is breaking it down step by step. Even though it's a quantum concept and a quantum reality that we're living in, I'm trying to bring it forward in a way that is linear, understandable, because we've been trained in a linear fashion. So our brains need to hear it, like, break it down for me. What do I do first? What do I do second? Etc. And so I'm teaching people how to bring their consciousness in a concept from the ancient East, pratyahara, and it means to withdraw your senses. And it means that we've been externally oriented, and we have to bring our attention, our senses, and bring them inward, and which we do in meditation. But there are many additional ways to do that, particularly good news for people who have a difficult time meditating. And there are ways to build circuitry inside. So what I'm doing basically is, because we've been externally oriented, we have a photon density externally oriented. We have neurocircuitry then fashioned to monitor the outer world instead of monitoring the inner world. And the inner world is the true world. It is the rest of the story, if you will. And so as we direct our attentions inwardly, we create photon density at the central core of the body. And the human system has a toric field that is created because energy is dropping down through the body, and that energy is us. We are an energy being, right? We are energy. We are springing forward into this third dimension where consciousness is expanding, and we're bringing conscious energy here. We're bringing consciousness to the energy that is here. We're waking up at the third dimensional level to a higher frequency. And so as we do so, we kind of shoot ourselves into this third dimension, and we land on planet Earth, and we kind of splat a little bit, and then we turn and kind of rise up in the midst of that. And as we rise, that energy then cycles up through the body and comes out the top of the head and rains down around the outside of the body, comes back in about the tip of the spine. This is measurable bioenergetics. And then it rises up through the core again, out the crown, out the top of the head, and just recycles and recycles. It's constantly being replenished from overhead, constantly hitting the earth, and then rising up from the earth in what I call step down for human consumption, so that we can perceive it and we can start to work with it.
Would you explain that as a flow of protons? How would you explain that?
Yes. Well, it is the flow of protons, and it is all light ultimately. So protons are just compressed light, right? So we're the more dense, the more compressed, the more dense, and then we start naming it as different particles. So we're creating this density of light, energy, photons at the core, and it becomes dense enough that it has an effect on the electrons. And so the electron then becomes more tangible, having an influence on the atoms, having an influence on changing the vibrational frequency at the molecular level. Then the sensory nervous system can start to perceive something there because it has more mass, it has more density to it. It has a quickening that, oh, there's something there. And we develop a sense of self deep in the core of our own system that we never had because our attention was external. We were looking to the outer world to give us feedback on who we are. We were looking for you to tell me if I'm okay, and etc. So we develop a sense of self based on externalization of our senses. So this pratyahara is this idea, one of the most important things that an individual will ever do to awaken to their own true self is to return, to withdraw their senses, not to seal off from the outer world, but to just fold in like an accordion, like just quicken at the core. And by doing so, we start to create photon density, sensory receptorship at the core of our being. And the next thing you know, we have a sense of self that's unconditional. I can feel who I am regardless of what's going on in my external circumstances. So previously, I had to control my external circumstances in order to feel a sense of self. But now, if I have this sense of self that's internally or anchored and oriented, it doesn't matter what you're doing. I still feel who I am. And so I become unconditional in and unwavering in my presence here. So by doing this, we start to develop a sense of self, and the sensory nervous system starts to memorize who we are, and it stops referencing the outer world in order to do that. And that frees up a whole lot of energy that is constantly spent on controlling our environment for a sense of safety. And so our fight or flight system starts to decline, starts to rest, because we're not under threat. We know who we are. We know everything's okay. We have a sense of self at the cellular level and the chemical level responsively. So in this, we're able to build circuitry for our wholeness instead of our partialness or our relative selves. And I'm teaching people how to build circuitry of embracing different emotional states, different thoughts, different experiences without naming them and without having a judgment on them. Once we name something, we have a judgment about it. We have a decision, we have a story about it, we have a whole perception of what goes along with that. And it makes it really hard as an energy being to shapeshift our energies in an instant because we think we have to work through the story before things can change. And then we start to feel apathetic, like frustrated. We can't change the things that we want to change. So if we stop naming things and stop working with diagnoses and that kind of thing, what happens is we have access to energy that we could start to shift. And when we shift the energy, we start to heal, regardless of the diagnosis. And this is what explains people healing, even though doctors are telling them, you've only got a short period, or this isn't going to go so well for you. And years later, they're here telling us the story about they don't understand it, but they're well. And the reason that they're well is because they didn't bite into the story. They didn't attach themselves to that which they were being told. And so the energy remained available to be this self-healing, self-rejuvenating toric field flow through their system, which is designed to constantly be perfecting and recreating the temple of the body that we've been hearing about for centuries. So I'm teaching people that when they have an experience and a charge in that experience, that there's something happening in the body in that instant. And if they took their mind's attention to their body, they would feel an area of charge in their throat or their chest or their belly, their gut, what have you. And there's message in that. There's medicine in it, in fact. And if they would learn, and they can, that's what I'm teaching people how to do, how to build the circuitry to connect the dots so that the energy isn't getting blocked and building up as this charge, but rather maintaining its flow, then they can not only heal from this circumstance, but they evolve themselves consciously by establishing the circuitry for their own evolution to rise in its vibrational frequency, by raising up through the body to the high brain centers above the primitive brain where fight or flight gets triggered. We awaken in these high brain centers where we are creator. And this, is regarding the Vedas and Hinduism and these kinds of principles that were really just instruction manuals on enlightenment and awakening to the quantum being. We start recognizing that the gods that were on the mountaintop are actually positioned as states of consciousness higher in the brain than the primitive brain and the fight or flight, the diencephalon, and up above, and opening up the relationship between the thalamus and the hypothalamus in the brain allows us to operate as creator rather than reactor, rather than responder, but actually generative of our entire world and the experience that we're having in it. So at that place, we're able to, healing happens as a byproduct, and we start thinking in terms of unity and presence and the quality of heaven on earth, or heaven earth as I call it. It's just one thing. It's not two separate worlds. So it's an opportunity for us to learn how to move energy and then build the neurocircuitry to support the sustaining of that new energy flow, so that we can ultimately evolve from living in our analytical mind to living in our quantum mind that can perceive through a stimulation of the pineal, which is receiving high frequency energies all the time. But we've never been taught how to tap those things, and this is what we're doing with the book.
It's fascinating. Is it like every human being potentially is an antenna, and it really is, and it's so grounded in science, because we know, for instance, the effect of breathing on the parasympathetic and autonomic nervous system. These are things that people suffer with every day. And what I love about it, and what I love about how you present it, is that it really is applicable for everyone, and very simply. So, and these are things that are grounded in very, very ancient texts. And it is speaking of something that I can't really explain what it is and what exactly it all means, but there's something profound there. And what you say there about potentially reaching higher consciousness or higher levels, and maybe there is an upgrade that we are going through, or that we can go through. And to finish off, I'd really love your thoughts on that. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, and where would you like this to have taken you and maybe planet Earth in 5 years' time?
Yeah. Definitely. So I am definitely here to help humanity reach a critical mass in mastering their invisible selves, so that their visible selves have a much better experience here on Earth, and so that we begin to learn what unconditionality is like, what divine love is, what true healing is, and what true mastery is. I feel that in the next 5 years, humanity is definitely going to hit this critical mass. It's certainly what I'm wanting from the writing of this book and the publishing of it, and the promotion of it out into the world is an invitation to say even these simple things that you can do every day and change your driver's seat. We've been given this beautiful Ferrari, and we're trying to drive it from on top of the hood, on top of the roof of the car, wondering why it doesn't go very fast or doesn't do the things we want it to do. And we have to learn how to sit down in the driver's seat, what it actually is. It's a totally different perspective than how we've been trained to live in this world. And so as we do so, we begin to have enough energy left over to care about one another and to actually find solution in the issues and the problems. The issues and challenges and the frictions in our lives are the medicine that is here to attempt to awaken us. But we've been taught that it's bad or wrong and that we have to stay away from it. And so we cut 50% of our potential out at the moment that we don't want to have a negative feeling of guilt or shame or fear or what have you. And when in fact those energies are the missing link in the recipe of how to evolve ourselves. When we can embrace those things and recognize they're just energies, there's no story about it. There's nothing, it has no meaning, and except the meaning that we place upon it, only because we were trained to do such things in a judgmental fashion. And so when we learn to just start embracing the raw energy being that we are in every way that it shows up, we transcend this idea that we need to survive, and we bring truly the blissful state of consciousness that we are at our very foundation. We bring it to life here in this dimension. In all the other dimensions that we have access to and that we do exist in, this is the one where the friction occurs, but where we have an opportunity to take duality and create unity out of it. But we think that we have to fight against something in order to stake our claim or to stand our ground. And it's actually the embracing of all things that is necessary. And so for myself, I'm interested in embodying that in every facet of my being, in every way that I can, so that I can find even more ways of sharing the how-to with humanity, so that we can all play in this world the way that we were designed to together.
Well, Dr. Sue Morter, thank you very much for sharing your story, and really your mission is one that really is profound in terms of how it can help people. And I really feel I love how you brought it together in your own personal experiences, but also how you're applying this as a clinician. And this really is a message that needs to get out there. So I really encourage people to get out there and read your book. Where can people find you?
Well, the book is called The Energy Codes, and you can pre-order it. The book is launching with Simon & Schuster on March 19th, and they can come to my website, Dr. Sue Morter, DrSueMorter.com, and they can even go to Dr. Sue Morter / order the energy codes and not only get the book, but also get some meditative experiences and some other gifts that come along with that if they were interested in that. The book is cool in that it has some links inside of it that you can go to for video demonstrations of everything that I'm teaching, showing you how to do it. So it's kind of a multimedia approach to trying to learn and remember. It's actually remember who we are and to activate those things on this deep cellular and genetic level so that we can turn on all of the vibrational frequencies that we are intended to be here.
Sue, I wish you all the best, and I really hope we continue this conversation because your work is just fascinating and brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. My great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to today's show. For more information, you can read the full transcript, articles, and discussion on our website, humanoriginproject.com. You can visit us on social media at Human Origin Project on Facebook and The Human Origin Project on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter or join the forum boards and email list to keep up to date with all the new information. And if you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review because it helps others to find this information and helps us to bring you the topics you want to discuss and hear about. Until next week, I hope your life is filled with happiness, healthiness, and harmony.